This is a public service announcement brought to you by West Coast Hops and the good folks at HenHouse Brewing Company.
Welcome to HenHouse Unruffled, an audio companion to the beers of HenHouse Brewing Company. Each episode will take a deeper dive into each beer's concept, recipe, can art, sensory, and more with your hen host, Fridge.
What up?
What's up, Unruffled listeners? This is not Fridge. Sayre here. Our usual Unruffled host is out today, but despair not. I am here with three incredible members of the Chicken Gang to talk about Allow Me to Reintroduce Myself, the Black IPA. Shout out to Jay-Z. Joining me on the podcast today, we've got Mike Guilford, our quality manager. We've got Nick Moreira, our production manager. And we have the assistant general manager here at the Palace of Barrels, Michael Fajardo. We are going to hang out, drink, Allow Me to Reintroduce Myself, the Black IPA, and talk about Black IPAs in general, as well as my ridiculous abiding love for Sean Corey Carter. Without further ado, let's delve in to the dark and bitter.
I did listen to the whole Black album and the acapella Black album.
Nice.
Today.
I listened to the whole Black album and the Just Blaze S. Carter, the remix project that followed already today.
The first time I've ever listened to the Black album was last night.
Holy shit. Bob's was like 2 days ago.
That was like, the Black album was like the prime of me getting into music. Like,
Yeah.
the beginning of LimeWire and burning CDs. And it was kind of like the last of the comprehensive albums.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that you bring up the LimeWire thing, because one of the things that I think makes this record live on historically was how smart it was to drop the acapellas and the instrumentals, because that was like the downloading mixtapes, downloading like bootlegs crescendo. Like it had always been a super music geek thing, but it became so easy, and it was before the regulations hit. Like the technology made it easy, and then the regulations made it illegal. But there was this little window where you had access to like, would you like every Grateful Dead show from 1987 through 2004? Like, push this button. And also from a music production standpoint, that going all digital. So it was way cheaper for people to edit music in their home and make stuff. I was trying to get an exact comprehensive number, but all the estimates are there was over 100 remix versions of this album, because they dropped the album, dropped the acapellas, dropped the instrumentals, and people just went wild with it.
The instrumentals and the verses are both so good on their own in different ways. Like, I was listening to the acapella version of Change Clothes. That's a completely different song. Like, without that beat, it is not the like pool party summertime vibe that you get with the song itself. When it's acapella, like, it's like hard.
That's
Super
interesting.
hard.
That's interesting. That's also like an epitome of something only Jay can do. Like, that is a pop hit, and the chorus is like a little weird 2-bar, stay fresh to death, what up on the projects. Like, it shouldn't be a massive popular hit, but it was. Like,
It's because of the beat. The beat is like what you want in a pop song. Like, it's MTV. Fun, exciting.
super sparse.
Yeah.
Anyways, like I said, this could go for a very long time.
You said it was remixed 100 times?
Like every intrepid producer. So it's this moment where you've got what's now become SoundCloud culture, right? Like, people will literally post beats on SoundCloud with like a tag every so many seconds, so someone can't just steal it. And there's a lot of people who make lots of money selling music stems that way, right? Like, got the club going up on a Tuesday. That Drake song was a SoundCloud artist who had that song on SoundCloud. Drake downloaded it, put himself on it, and then called them. And was like, would you guys like to be fabulously wealthy? And they said yes. But at this point, you've got all these people who are now making music at home much more cheaply than they used to, right? Using programs like Fruity Loops and whatever might have been available at the time, needing to get noticed. And the biggest artist in the world, and like probably still technically the best rapper in the world at that point, just gave you 13 acapellas to work with. And like a whole bunch of interesting things happened from that. The most lauded one is the Grey album, where Danger Mouse, this producer from England who became Gnarls Barkley, he remixed the Black album entirely with sounds from the Beatles' White album. So like, this album is literally the reason I know the Beatles.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man. I took a Beatles appreciation class in college.
Wait, did you go to UC Santa Cruz?
No, it's Sonoma State here.
Or they had one at UC Santa Cruz as well.
Nice. Yeah, the Grey album, my first introduction actually was last night.
Really?
To it, and so I listened to it from start to finish, and Yeah, as a Beatles fan, I do not approve of what he did to that music.
I think it's pretty incredible.
I mean, the reason I'd ask is because it's like Black IPA, to circle
Yeah.
back to the beer,
Okay.
like is the first in the long line of, depending on what side of the fence you stand on, bastardizing IPA or opening IPA up to all kinds of variations.
Right, and like viral styles, right?
Right? Like you have Black IPA is the first thing that's not just IPA or English IPA or Imperial IPA. And then you get white IPA, and then you get red IPA, then you get rye IPA. And
Brown
now
IPA.
you're all into the new, like every IPA you can get now. So
Belgian IPA too.
Oh,
which
that
is,
was a
which is
thing.
not which is an American creation.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting piece of this question. There's a couple different ways to come at it. I'll remind myself to come at it the other way. But like, have we reached the point, and you, Michael, deal with the public much more than I think anybody at this table now. The younger drinkers that are coming into our tasting room, is IPA like a useful suffix? Do they? I don't think you relate to it like you would another beer style, right? Like it's either like I like IPA or I don't.
Yeah, you do get some folks that are kind of polar in the IPA category. I just think the term as a whole is it's a catch-all. It's a catch can at this point. But when most consumers, especially the younger demographics, when they come in and they see the word IPA, the immediate expectation is it's hazy, juicy, tropical, nice soft mouthfeel with low bitterness, low perceived bitterness.
Interesting.
That's what I've kind of seen as the general consensus
So
coming forward.
it's an automatic expectation of that. It's not, the word IPA doesn't instantly provoke the question, is it hazy or not? They just automatically assume that it is hazy. Like it's become that popular that is just IPA now.
I don't want to, cast judgment as a whole or anything like that and speak for everybody, but yes, when people see the word IPA now, they do more or less expect it to be hazy, visually juicy, tropical, and you're seeing that with this is general market as a whole. If you go to the grocery store, you see bigger name brands who've completely stopped brewing their pills, which help build their name brand, and then they've stocked the shelves with nothing but hazy IPAs, which is what's you see on the can on the packaged product. So I think that's definitely influencing kind of consumers' belief in what the style is as a whole when it comes from craft breweries specifically.
Right. Because I was going to say, we're across the street from the definitional IPA brewery right now, right? And they certainly mean for you to expect something very different than haze when you pick up their IPA, right? So let's reset a little bit here. We got the Jay-Z got us going, and we got right in before introductions. The voice you just heard, Michael Fajardo.
Yes, my name is Michael Fajardo. I am the assistant general manager here at the Palace of Barrels in Petaluma. I oversee daily operations here.
Awesome. And prior to that, you heard Nick Moreira.
Yes, I'm Nick Moreira. I'm a production manager. I also wrote this recipe for Allow Me to Introduce Yourself.
Thank you for doing that. And Michael Guilford.
This is Mike Guilford. I'm the director of quality.
Word. And two absent voices today that you're used to hearing on the podcast. No Bob today, no Fridge today. So very different cast of characters for this very special release. Getting back into what we were talking about, that kind of gets to this question of, like, I think the most cynical way to view Black IPA, Milkshake IPA, any of these things is like, well, the three letters IPA are how you sell beer. So if you want to make something like blank, figure out a way to call it IPA, and then you can sell it. I'm trying to put, like, in Mike Guilford, you'll probably be like the one who was most aware of what was going on in the industry at the time that this popped up. How did you receive it initially? Or was it, like, were you intrigued, or were you, like, looking at it side-eyed?
I mean, I was definitely interested. Like, so IPA at the time, like, we're talking, like, the late 20-aughts, right?
Yeah, 08 is the sublimely versus Hop in the Dark fight is 08-09.
All right, so I'm at Russian River, and IPAs taste kind of one way.
Okay.
They're dry, they're bitter. Like, when the Black IPA thing came around, it did seem like, I mean, it says pale right in the name, so it was kind of weird. And honestly, like, this was kind of a while ago. We work in the brewing industry, so my memory is a little bit slight for the time. But I remember the fight for the Cascadian Dark Ale as a name, which I thought was very interesting, right? It's because there was a bunch of people that liked the style, right? That was like combining what a lot of the brewers at the time had kind of started with. Like, they made dark beers when they were home brewers, and then IPAs became a thing. And I was like, oh shit, we can combine those, and it's still interesting and it's cool. But people that were making them and liked them also didn't want to call them black IPAs. So that's where I think that Cascadian Dark Ale kind of came out of. And then you had lots of people just start making them that didn't taste good at all.
Right.
And I think that's kind of like sometimes how quickly some of these things come and go is, you need to make it dark and roasty, but not so bitter with malts that, the hops, because you're still going to load them up with hops. I mean, IPAs were bitter then, right? And that's how you got super bitter, astringent, like, black IPAs. But I don't know. At the time, I think because it was kind of the first one, that it seemed intriguing because we were all still like making new things.
Right.
Because then the white IPA came out, which was also kind of interesting and intriguing, which seems ridiculous now. It's like, oh, let's put wheat in an IPA and see what happens.
I mean, it's
like
straight
what?
up just what IPA is now.
Yeah, and I mean, so that is a whole nother debate too, whether white IPA is supposed to be brewed with a wheat yeast and if it's supposed to be spiced. I do believe the original one, well,
You're talking about Chainbreaker?
quote unquote original one might have came from like Deschutes and
Chainbreaker from Deschutes was the first one that I was aware of.
yeah, and that was I can't think of the name of that brewery now.
Oh, it was a collab?
Yeah, it was a collab. Boulevard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they decided to combine the things that they knew, which was like an IPA that was hoppy and like Belgian beers, and kind of smushed them into one thing, and ended up with this like wheat. I think there was a bunch of spices in it.
Coriander, yeah.
Yeah, they did white sage. There's all kinds of things in there, and it was like this fruity, fruit forward, kind of like fluffy, pillowy, like IPA.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of the beginning of that too. So it was like, oh wow, that's wild, like two companies that make two products, like trying to invent something new. So, it was still plenty of time for when we were trying to like make new things and experiment. So, I think just like it is now, people are going to stand on either side of that fence. But I don't know. I always thought it was interesting.
Well, it's one thing that I think is really interesting. This came up when Nick and I were talking yesterday. Hazy's kind of the first viral style that didn't get ruined. When I say viral style, I mean a component of that marketing-driven aspect of it, where you've got people brewing it who've never had the original, right? Whereas before, like when you think about double IPA or something like that, people were encountering 90 Minute or encountering Yule Smith or something like that and being like, holy shit, and like, we got to brew something like that. But the community was small enough and so separate from the kind of types of marketing that would make something viralize, and there just weren't enough breweries anyways. So you really did like show up at GABF and taste something and be like, whoa, what's going on here? And potentially even have a conversation with the producer before you endeavored to produce it. Whereas Black IPA, it went from 2 breweries in the country making them to like every brewery in the country, it seemed like, in 2 years, right?
Yeah, pretty short order, for sure.
And we saw that even faster with Brute, right?
Yeah.
And I think that in both those examples, and probably also white IPA, and red IPA had its moment. I'll still fight people over Dirty D from Altamont on the brown IPA thing. I actually enjoyed that beer a great deal. It's a great feature for Citra. But each of those were very flash in the pan because of the way that ideas move through the brewing world now, where it's like people who don't have any real, like, don't have that like genuine moment of inspiration of like putting this thing in your mouth and being like, wait a minute, this is different. How would we do this? What would we do differently with this? Until you reach hazy IPA, right? Like in each of those instances, bad versions start showing up all over the market, and the enthusiasm in the consumer from the style deflates.
I think that's what it is. It's the bad versions. Like hazy IPA, most of them are decent to great in that range. Like there's not too many like really bad hazy IPAs. It's a pretty easy style to nail. Brewed IPA and black IPAs, it's harder to do because you have to be very specific in what you do to make it well. Like you don't have as much creative freedom, I think, as you would with a hazy IPA.
Why is that?
Because of the touchy like for black IPA specifically, the ingredients are so touchy that you could go too far roasty, too far hoppy. Like those ingredients necessarily don't play that well together, so it's like a really hard balance to get. So you can't just pick any black malt, pick any hops, and then, play with the dry hop or something. Like you can't, like a hazy IPA, you could do wheat, oats, 100% two-row, rye if you want. It's not going to make it bad. And a malt bill for hazy IPA is endless. Mm-hmm. And same with the hops. I mean, pick a fruity hop or two, and then possibilities are endless.
Right. As long as you have good quality
Yeah,
hops
as long
going
like
into it.
to make a good IPA, to make a good hazy IPA, all you have to do is give a shit.
But that is kind of remarkable because hazy, like, it did have that exact same process where like a few breweries in the Northeast were really making them, and then snap your fingers, and the whole world is making them. Except that it had a completely different outcome. Where, as Michael, you were just saying, it now has come to probably more than anything else define what people expect when they say IPA in a matter of what, like 6-7 years.
Like, speaking on the hazy IPA, the people who frequent craft breweries and tap rooms that actually give a fuck about the beer, you're going to get that fresh hop flavor and that hop aroma, and that's what people are coming back to when they want to order that style. Where I also see another point of view, that most of the beer that you get from large producers out there on store shelves already tasting terrible, oxidized, and beyond its life expectancy. So if you already have these off flavors, these papery, these wet cardboard notes in, a classic American IPA, now it's just hazy, and that's about it. You're still going to get the same flavor, maybe a slight more juicy character because of that late hop addition. But the people that actually care about the beer and care about drinking good beer enjoy that experience, and the people that are already drinking, that warm stored oxidized IPA, now you're just giving it a slightly different profile, but you're still drinking that same stuff. So I think it appeals to everybody on all fronts. If you understand where I'm getting at.
Well, I think you're making a really good point about it came with a behavior change, right? It came with a critical mass of breweries, and it came with like people beyond serious beer geeks getting their beer brewery direct. Because like if you talk about those Vermont breweries that started the whole hazy thing, you couldn't get it any other way, right? Like the can releases, people lined up, took numbers or whatever. And, well, of course, now we're in like a hazy little thing world, and grocery stores have plenty of hazy IPAs. So to put this differently, if in 2008 Black IPA is happening and there is the density of breweries that we currently have and the change in consumer behavior of like, I go and get my beer directly from the brewery, would the freshness have been enough to save Black IPA from its own demise? Or is it much more about the technical challenge just being...
I don't know. I mean, I still think that I could sit down and drink several porters or stouts. I don't think people can right now. I don't think bitterness had its moment too, right? Like most things everything was kind of moving towards bitter. Then there was like the arms race to be what could be the most bitter beer.
Right.
But then it's kind of like tapered off and you see lots of things less bitter. And, just the grain by itself kind of presents, I think, enough bitterness in this beer that the current juice box generation of drinkers probably wouldn't accept this as something I could drink several of. So I don't know. I think the sweetness from a hazy beer is what helped that become a more entrenched style.
Okay.
Right? Because if you look at even the seltzers, as most of them aren't actually sweet, but they're all fruit flavors.
And they're certainly completely lacking in bitterness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No bitterness.
Yeah.
Right. Granted, there's like light body, but still, like I think you're capturing like a demographic now that prefers fruity and sweet over like dark and bitter. Like think about what people order at Starbucks, right? It's like rarely you're getting a black coffee or just an espresso.
Right.
Right. There's several pumps of something in there. Maybe a big old dollop of milk or some form of milk,
Right.
So I don't know. I think the general public's just like shift would not have, no matter what, I don't think Black IPA would have done what like hazy has done kind of in any time frame really.
So then knowing that, you guys as brewers, how much of your job is to kind of wake people up out of that or drag them in the direction that you think is potentially more rewarding? And how much of your job is to react to changing market perception?
Ultimately, right, we need to stay in business, which means we need to sell beer that people are going to buy. But I think if we can produce those kinds of beers, right, keep the lights on, keep the doors open. We made 115 brands last year.
Yeah.
Make hazy beer because, it's good. It tastes good. I drink it. That's what people want. But with things like we're doing right now and making like a pretty damn good Black IPA.
I can't believe how good this beer is.
That like... It allows people to at least like experiment and taste and like maybe keep their eyes open for like something new and different. Like for the people that come in and say like, is it hazy? You'd be like, well, no, it's black. It's like, what? Would you like to try it? And be like, oh, that's interesting. And maybe they pass, but still like they try it. And like, there's so many different kinds of beers out there that it seems like IPA has kind of become this umbrella that shadows a lot, like, kind of, it doesn't allow you to see a lot of other things. So it is kind of nice that we make as much beer as we do, and we have the ability to make smaller batches of more interesting things, and pretty soon even smaller batches of even more interesting things. So yeah, it's obviously a lot of it's guided from marketing and sales and like what's moving right now, but also what can we do that's interesting that might spark the interest for sales and for marketing. It's like, hey, we got this, go run with it and see what we can do with it.
Yeah, did the stem of Black IPA come from you guys wanting to make one, or from us when we were still doing the DeLorean thing, being like, we need more DeLoreans, what about Black IPA, what about brown ale?
I don't remember. I know it was like, the words brand extension stick in my head, and that for sure comes from you to us. But it's like, what do you go back not that far and make?
Yeah.
And like, Black IPA is definitely one of those. Like, brown ale seems to be even further back. That was my first homebrew batch. We're talking the fucking 90s now.
Yeah, it's funny that that's like an eternity ago.
Yeah, when my kid says, I think that was from like the late 1900s. I'm like, wait a minute. You can't say it like that. I was alive.
I was making alcohol.
I was old. I was making alcohol. Late 1900s. What the hell? But yeah, that does seem like an eternity ago, right?
Right.
Black IPA is something that I always wanted to make, and then I think it was from the short range series. It was like, what other old school styles? And I think someone mentioned Black IPA, and I was like, yes, absolutely, we're doing that. I wrote a recipe, let's do it.
Right.
And we finally got to do it. And I only wanted to do it because of how many bad ones there are. Like, I became of legal drinking age in 2012, so I started drinking IPAs as Black IPA was on its way out. I drank a lot of Wookie Jack, and the rest of them were bad at that point. So something that's bad, I want to make it good. That's fun and a challenge. So that was my reason for wanting to make a Black IPA, is to see if we could make one that wasn't bad.
Well, goal achieved.
Yeah, this is absolutely fucking delicious.
I really love this beer, man. I wrote the social media copy before tasting it. I'd seen the hops we were using, and I said, espresso romano meets lamb's bread being the like very old school weed strain. And I was like, oh shit, like that's exactly what we did. Because I was trying to put myself back, because 2008, 2009, 2010 was when I was like running very hip beer bars and pouring like all kinds of new shit every week. And so the Black IPA moment was like a huge part of that. Like, I remember that argument, that like ridiculous, like what should we call these things, argument between Deschutes and Stone. I remember a whole bunch of other breweries coming up with them. I remember session Black IPAs, double Black IPAs, all of these things. And then I remember, I think by the time you're talking about when they really started to get uninspired and boring, was there's a malt-derived food coloring called Cinnamar that made its way into the world, and they were literally just color correcting these beers to hit the red IPA, brown IPA, black IPA. And then it really was, to me, cynical. When I was doing the research about this style, apparently Vermont claims actual ownership of the original. The Vermont Pub and Brewery, the founder brewer was getting divorced and wanted to make a beer called Dark and Bitter and did so. Then one of his assistant brewers, who became Alchemist. Yes, dude from The Alchemist, was like, yo, that beer was cool, but I don't really want to make the like F your ex-wife beer again. So they renamed it and put it out. But then it disappeared for many years, or like wasn't, never really viralized. Because in the 90s, like, again, you would have had to like meet up at a symposium and talk about it.
Yeah. And there was 1,000 breweries, you know. No one could afford to go to them.
Yeah. And I do think it's interesting that the two places that this style pops up, there was a crazy density of breweries. I don't know as much about the Portland scene, why Portland was Portland. I do know San Diego was very much connected to Homebrew Mart, like super leading homebrew place that all of these amateurs turn pro, pros turning amateur, like whatever, would hang out, right? And that's, I think, where you get, like, anywhere you see an early burgeoning beer scene, I think you'll find big homebrew club presence, people reading Papazian books, people like getting together being like, what if we did this crazy shit? That I think remains a big part of what makes small breweries cool, is like, why the hell not, I think Black IPA, in theory, is the perfect home brew. Home brewers tend to do a lot of stouts and porters because they're
They don't have to be perfect, but they want to do IPAs because that's what's been cool since back then. So to be able to do that, but also like hide any imperfections with black malt, in theory, seems like something you could really do as a home brewer. I don't think it necessarily works out that way because it is such a difficult balance, and they do have to be well crafted. But I think in theory, it is a good home brew.
Yeah, and just absolutely in line with that, like, I'm only making 5 gallons of this so I can fuck around and try some stuff that is such a part of the story of home brewing and then early craft brewing. Let's talk about the hops that work in these beers. I was really pleased to see that we were going in such a like dirtweed direction with our hop aroma on this beer, because one of the things that I remember really disliking and always finding an incongruence with was like the coffee and mango fight that would happen if you tried to use certain hops in a black IPA. When black IPA was really hip was also around the time that like hop varietals became brands. So like being able to say this had like Simcoe or Citra or whatever at the time was cool. I think back then we would have been talking about like Calypso. And those were like showing up on labels for the first time. And yeah, I had a really tough time with the like tropical fruit and dark chocolate or like roasty espresso character together. Is that an opinion that you guys share, or are there hop varietals you'd love to see around these dark malts that we aren't using?
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, I do like a little bit of the, like, I don't, like, the tropical fruit character I think would be weird.
Yeah.
But, like, the stone fruit character, I mean, there's a bunch of Simcoe in here. I think works well, right? Like, you know, this the chocolate orange.
Right.
You know, it's like Christmas to me. So I think if you don't get too bitter, if you don't go, like, too, like, coffee and high roast, and you get, like, kind of that, like, chocolate kind of roast character, like the stone fruit or even the like orange, you know, that
chocolate
that
covered
kind of
orange peel is delicious.
You know, like that. I love that. That is like one of my favorite zones of like of flavor combinations when it comes to something roasty.
I'm definitely here for the earthy and the citrusy components from some of the hops that be selected for a beer like this. Like what you're talking about, Sayre. Yep. Don't think that like big tropical juicy notes should be super prevalent in a style that is called black IPA nowadays. You're not going to want like purple grape or that mango or lychee or anything like that. Just kind of not really harmonizing with the overall profile in the glass.
I do like the choice of a tandem too. That kind of gives you that like graham cracker, like
A graham cracker, baking spice.
Yeah.
You know, that goes well with chocolate or coffee.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, whatever we did in here, man, I'm all for it. For me, the like chocolate covered orange people is that espresso Romano. Like, so there's espresso Romano is literally just serving your espresso with lemon. Like, it's not complicated, but it is one of those flavor things where you're like, this is like bitter on acidic, but they actually complement each other in a really interesting way and like take what you don't like about each of those flavors out. So I do enjoy those together. Shifting gears a little bit, initially this was a DeLorean beer. With the DeLorean beers, we were really talking about like stuff that's dead or needs its habitat restored.
Gruits.
Style-wise. Well, that's not a short-range DeLorean.
That's a long-range DeLorean.
Yeah.
I want it short.
That's liquid history.
Short range was your classic pale ale. I wanted mid-range DeLorean to be a Czech-style Pils.
Oh, shit.
And then I wanted long range to be a Gruit. Those were just pipe dreams, though.
Well, that's really interesting because Czech style Pils is back.
Oh, I know.
Right? Like Czech lager, like I don't want to over assume from like the 7 personalities on beer Twitter, but like Jesus, you cannot get those people to shut up about Czech lager.
I mean, I just saw a label of a beer of ours that said something along the lines of, if you're drinking Czech Pilsner, are you chuggy? And then I found out what chuggy means.
You are welcome, Nick.
Fill me in. What?
It's based essentially it's how it's how the ones below us, Z, it's how Gen Z negatively refers to basic bitch millennials.
Chuggies?
Yeah, as chuggy.
Oh.
So it's more directed towards females than it is males, which I think is stupid because I want to own it.
Just like I'm Senor Chugi.
Yeah.
So is that like boomer? Is that like us for
It's
boomer?
us for boomers,
100%.
yes. But it's like it's crazy recent shit that's not cool. So like Chugi would be like a Patagonia coat.
Yeah.
Right? Like a fucking Toms. Those shoes Toms.
Yeah.
Or like
Chugi as fuck.
Or like either
boots
the
and
coffee
sweaters?
cups with the
after
writing
that.
on them, or like the signs in your house that's not specifically live, laugh, love, but like stuff that's like that.
Just like if you're not with me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. type thing.
Yeah.
100% chuggy. Super chuggy.
Ugg boots.
Yeah. So that's why we're skipping the Czech thing. We're going straight to Dortmund to be like, Czech was yesterday. But all I'm saying is that gets to, I could talk a lot about that label. That's a future podcast. By the time this podcast is in the world, Indie Darlings will be ready to come out, so we can say the name.
Yeah, I got
and
packaged
it's coming.
today, so
I saw it in the
today.
fridge back there. Where I think it's interesting to have this conversation that we could have about Czech, and now maybe we can have about Black IPA, and kind of why I was so attracted. Obviously, the Black Album, Black IPA thing was the main reason for this concept in the marketing. But I do also feel like, I think the last two really hip beer things I've been to, which was our pop-up bar in Portland, that brought out like all the heads, and several months before, this beer festival in Reno with a bunch of the hype breweries, somebody gave me a Black IPA, like that they'd recently produced. And like, first one was from Rip, who, to their credit, they're from San Diego. They never stopped making them. Like, that's been a part of Rip Brewing the entire time. And the other was Steeplejack, which was a 1-year-old woman-owned brewery in Portland. I was like, interesting, So like, is Black IPA going to find its place in the modern beer spectrum? Obviously, I don't think it's going to be anybody's flagship anytime soon. But I'd be interested to see where it fits in the contemporary beer palette of, like, as you say, lots of sweet stuff. The IPAs are sweet, and then the adjunct beers have become Jamba Juice levels of sweet, right?
Yeah.
And the stouts have become pastry levels of sweet. If our way back to bitterness and savor is through this black stuff, because, like, almost always, if something happens in beer, you can assume that the reaction to it is not going to be to dial back slightly. It's going to be go to the complete opposite side of the spectrum, right? So like super juicy, under attenuated IPA, Czech lager out of a side pour, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of really hip breweries that's like essentially what they offer, right? And I could see this potentially being in conversation, but like Michael, you have much more experience with this lately than I do. How do you think our regulars are going to react to this?
I'm really, really excited to, once this podcast is done, to get on the floor and see how everybody receives this beer. I think a lot of our regulars are going to enjoy this recipe as a whole. Most of our consumers that come in here are looking for the hoppy stuff. That is what we distribute, I believe, the most of.
By like an order of magnitude. Yes.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So I think, throw an IPA up there. I think they're going to dive into it, and we're obviously going to greet them with splashes, get them to try it, get things outside their wheelhouse. Since we are known for making such great hoppy beers, when you start to bring in those, for lack of a better term, that fringe style, like when we did Bitcolin, the milkshake IPA, now we've got a black IPA in the mix. I'm sure there's one that I'm also forgetting. Yeah, people are willing to try it. They're willing to make it their first beer, and then, we'll see if they order a second one from there. One thing that I think maybe kind of a challenge with this one is the word black in there, because some consumers do equate dark beers to being very heavy,
Yeah.
filling, very large in caloric content. So, as soon as you put the word black up there are going to be a few people that are just going to, not for me, I don't want to feel full type thing.
Which is wild, considering like what a hazy IPA.
And,
Like an oyster stout next to a hazy double IPA, like oyster stouts might be like the lightest bodied beer that we have,
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure where that misconception comes from. I think maybe part of it might be due to the fact that the craft beer community has taken dark beers and kind of bumped it up in alcohol. So that's when you get the Rasputins, the Imperial Stouts, the Russian Imperial Stouts. Now you have pastry stouts on the market as well, too. So I can understand that from a viewpoint. But, I'm just generally intrigued as a whole to really, really see how this is going to be received, because you have plenty of hop aroma coming out of the glass. Tastes great, citrus booming, and it's not overtly roasty. It's more of like what you're talking about, Mike, that kind of chocolate vibe. So it's not bitter, it's not astringent, it's not over the top. Kind of melds the two styles together harmoniously and beautifully. So, I'm really intrigued to see how it's going to be received.
Yeah, I mean, I think the super honest, dumb marketing way to market a beer like this would have been to call it like a extremely hoppy porter, right? Like it has, for me, a ton of hop flavor, a really beautiful earthy hop aroma, but like all of the malt flavors are consistent with like American porters to me, I mean, a little more coffee, a little less chocolate than some of them. But, I mean, to go back to the caloric point, that's super funny because I think about every beer list that I wrote when Guinness was still on my list. Guinness was the least calorie beer that I carried. And I think the answer to your question of why people have that misconception is 4 decades of light beer marketing. right? Like the most funded, the most TV commercialed beers in this country for 2 generations were super pale, see-through, light beers. And that's just like a massive educational undertaking to reverse, you know? Like, it'll be interesting now that that whole sector is getting obliterated by seltzer to how we have that conversation in the future and whether people can realize that that's just another access, right? Like you can have an extremely heavy beer that's jet black in color and you can have a very dry beer that's jet black in color. But I do think that's some educational heavy lifting that...
I mean, it's kind of like what we talked about the other day about if we can bring mouthfeel and body into the conversation.
Yep.
Of like an educational thing for consumers beyond bitterness, fruitiness. You know, actually having mouthfeel as something that someone chooses their beer on is a whole nother level of beer nerdiness and educating a consumer.
Yeah, man, that's like the fantasy. And like nitrogenated beer gave that opportunity to get, now it's like the side pour faucets give that opportunity to discuss texture. Yeah, I mean that's like a fantasy world for me. I would love that.
One of my favorite analogies that I use in the tasting room when people have that misconception of dark beers having more calories, being heavier, more filling, I give it kind of a relation akin to a toaster. I'm like, if you throw that bread in and you set it to 1 or 2, okay, that's great. You can put some butter on it. But if you crank it all the way up to 10, it's not going to increase how much that toast is going to fill you up, right?
Right.
So it's like the same thing with beer. Just because you have a darker roasted malt character does not necessarily equate to...
that's great.
Yeah.
That's super. That's super. I found myself saying all the time when talking to people into dark beer was like, there's a bunch of ways to make a beer dark. Like, I can use a tiny pinch of the darkest malt, and that beer will change color. And that won't necessarily have a huge impact in terms of flavor or aroma. Or I can use a whole bunch of like some fairly dark malt. That'll drastically change the way the beer tastes and the colors. But you can't, just by looking at a beer, know which way I got it to that color. But I love that. I love that toast analogy. That's great.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one. It's because you know, when you're talking about like you know, no bitter beer face, like you know, like
For the rest of everyone in here who's younger than Mike and I,
Keystone Light commercial, but like I think it might have when you equated like beer was light and low calorie, and then you had a beer that was full of flavor. The assumption was that it was also full of calories.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I mean, Guinness is like pretty close to like Coors Light. I mean, it's very low in calories, but I think I think that might have been a part of that generation of like, you know, beer isn't all that flavorful, and so once you got this like big full flavor in your mouth, it was like, oh man, this must be full of calories. You know.
Yep.
That's an easy connection for a consumer to make too, related to food. Like something that's real big and rich is usually full of calories, and you know, green beans don't have much of a flavor and there's not much calories, and chocolate cake is intense and it's a lot of calories.
You hold like a chocolate bar in one hand and like a bag of a dozen apples in the other, and you're like, which one has more calories? This little chocolate bar right here. Right.
All right. Anything else on Allow Me to Reintroduce Myself we must cover?
It's a great label. The label's pretty tight.
I mean, JJ Stapes, though I do... Really, we should credit whoever designed... Actually, it wasn't the Black Album. It was some single I had. I have a bunch of pile of Jay-Z records over there. I think I did not bring the Change Clothes single, which is the one that we patterned a lot of this off. That's the Black Album right there, which Jay-Z in silhouette does reference our hen right there. H to the E-N is what we're naming this hen. This is very similar to like a white label Change Clothes single I had a sticker on it that said like Change Clothes, the some smash single from the Black Album in this font, and I sent that over to Josh, and because we had to pivot from the DeLorean pretty quickly, so I was like, what can we design quickly? And then obviously the Jay-Z reference for me is huge. Like I remember sitting outside a party my senior year in college when we had the bootleg of the Black Album and playing Dirt Off Your Shoulder for people in the car like it was a fucking drug deal, right? It was like, come to my like broke ass Volvo 740 and I'm gonna blow these speakers out playing this Timberland beat, like, and just like throughout the party, like people being like, wait, you have the CDR of the Black Album, like let's go to the car. And it is like crazy to overstate. I think like now people try to make these viral moments out of album releases that last like a very short amount of time, like Beyonce not just having an album appear what Kanye does with his stadiums and stuff like that. They're trying really hard to create these, like, I grab the culture for a moment. Like, the Black Album rumors, like, I remember Questlove released a text that he had sent to Jay-Z suggesting producers. And that spawned, like, a whole conversation about, like, oh my God, he's going to have this person on there, he's going to have this person on there. And then, like, there was this ad campaign around, like, who was going to be doing the beats. And initially it was going to be, like, one beat from every, like, legendary producer. That's not how it turned out. But it became this, like, crazy rumored thing. And then this is pre-LimeWire even, the Napster era. We were able to bootleg the thing. And it was, like, straight up like having contraband. Like, walk over to the car with me, like, pack the car, close the doors, like, show people the song. It was wild.
I was listening to this album today, and, like, every song on here brings back a memory for me. Like I think Encore and Dirt Off Your Shoulder was on every single middle school basketball team's warm-up tape. Every time. And then, like, Change Clothes was, like, out on the lake, hanging out by the pool during the summer. I remember the first time I heard December 4th, which I think is a really underrated song on this album, I was snowboarding. So back then, you put your iPod on shuffle, go through all your songs, and I had the Jay-Z discography because I had LimeWire. And so you don't necessarily get to control the ones that are going through. And it came on, and I was like, holy shit, what is this? Like, what album is this song off of? And
it's Gloria Carter, his mother's debut, who she's shown up on a couple of records since. And that's actually, December 4th is Just Blaze, but there was a couple of unknown producers. I mean, Ninth Wonder wasn't unknown, but he's since become a very famous person. Was, like, very underground, and he shows up on a Jay-Z album. That was a huge deal. What More Can I Say is these guys called the Buchanans, who've, like, never done much else, got a beat on that album. And then my first song is this dude Aqua, who's been, like, a industry, you know, like, is credited on a bunch of albums, but is not a star. And then obviously Kanye, DJ Quick, Just Blaze, Timberland, Pharrell, like, you know, massive stars working on the record. But it's crazy to, like, I think culture's so siloed and dispersed now that that's, like, almost an impossible thing to do, to grab the zeitgeist in the way that this album did in that time period.
Well, you don't have to now. Like, you don't have to make a comprehensive album anymore. It's we live in the world of singles. And I mean, we're kind of, I think, with Spotify coming back around to albums, because you pay for Spotify and then you just get all of the albums. Mm-hmm. But I think before that, in the mixtape era, when we were just burning CDs, we were downloading our favorite songs and putting that on a CD of different songs from different artists, which then led to iPods, which led to, I think, artists just had to put out singles, and they just put out one good song, and then 6 months later another good song, and then if they did put out an album, 50%, if not more, of the songs on that album had already been released, and nobody was listening to the albums anymore.
Well, the era you're talking about is actually the exception. So, like, basically ironically, prior to the White Album by the Beatles, biggest artists in the world released singles. Then you had enough singles, and the label was like, okay, we should do an album. You're going to cover this hit that's on the radio now, and we're going to round out the album, and we're going to put out an album. But it was a singles culture probably before the White Album. Even, like, Sgt. Pepper is a complete album with a theme and all that stuff too, right? But, you know, black music, it was even later. Like, Otis Redding Blue is sort of thematic, but, like, even that is singles that came out for several years prior to that, because singles ruled the day. Singles got you on radio. Jukeboxes were in places. Those operated off 45s. And then we became super album oriented for, like, 70s, 80s, 90s. Like, everybody had their favorite, like, top 10 albums lists. Like, I was thinking of another moment that grabbed the zeitgeist. Like, this was the Nirvana moment. Like, I was in junior high, I think, I was in junior high when Nevermind came out. And then when Kurt Cobain died, it was like the world stopped. You know, it was a huge
people
deal.
Crying at their lockers. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
like
that.
I remember, like, because I was such a hip hop head at that time. That was a little bit foreign to me. I was like, you mean the people with the Smells Like Teen Spirit video? Like, that's the thing. Yeah. My junior high, like, shut down. Like, people sitting in the like hallways, just, like, bawling their eyes out. But there are those moments and it'd be interesting to see, like, what could do that now. The other thing that jumped into my head when we were talking about how deep this album penetrated in the culture, I have more than 10 friends that voted for Barack Obama because he brushed his shoulders off. Like,
I mean, that was the song. That's the song off this album, right? Like, and we haven't even talked about it yet. Like, I named like a bunch of other songs, but like that is the one. Like, that is the MTV music video that I watched over and over and over and over again.
it's just an unbelievable song. The if you've seen Fade to Black, which is the documentary of making this album that concludes with the concert they did on its release, he's like talking about how he uses Timberland, and he's like, when you're feeling uninspired, you have to have those people in your life that are just always inspired. Cut to Timberland, hella fat in his studio with like a handle of like what looks like Sunny Delight, just like some orange drink, and he's like playing Jay-Z beats off his thing, and Jay's like kind of hating on him. And the dude plays like, I think 2 songs that became hits later. He plays the beat for The Potion by Ludacris. He plays a couple of different beats that are just like incredibly hot. I'm like, wait, what is that? And Jay's just like, basically telling him he sucks. He puts the beat for Dirt Off Your Shoulder on, walks out of the room screaming, I'm the fucking best there is. And just leaves Jay in the room. Like, and you just see the videos. He puts it on, and Jay just stands up and is just like looking, and just like looks around and is like, what the fuck? And he's just, I'm the fucking best there is, and storms out of the studio.
There's something to be said about just blind confidence.
Dude, I mean, he wasn't wrong.
That's what that song inspires.
Yeah.
Like, that song makes you feel like you are the shit. You put that song on, and you are the coolest person in the room.
Best rapper alive.
And now, Sensory First.
Welcome to Sensory First. I am not Bob Wagner. Bob Wagner is busy educating a new pack of Chicken Gang members for our Fairfax location all week long. So I, Sayre Petrikowski, am sitting here in his stead. I am sitting with Zach and Nick from the production team, and in our glasses is a delicious Black IPA, aka Cascadian Dark Ale, we're calling Allow Me To Reintroduce Myself. Nick, is it true that this is your baby?
It is.
You should be a proud father. This shit is delicious.
I kind of feel like I can retire, Like, I made a Black IPA that's not gross. Like, you could probably drink 16 ounces of it.
I'm going to take the probably off that. I drank 16 ounces of this beer last night.
Did you drink like 48 ounces?
I mean, say when. So talk to me about the approach of, like, what for you, what did you set out to do? How successful, like, how close is this to your goal?
My goal was to make a Black IPA that's not gross, because I haven't had very many. So it's kind of like, we started doing the, like, old school style things, starting with Short Range DeLorean, and so I thought it'd be fun to try and do something that I have never really had a good version of.
So what are the pitfalls we're trying to avoid? You say one that's not gross.
It was like, roasty malt is really intense, and it's kind of like takes over everything, and getting anything to complement it, I feel like, is a challenge. So picking hops that would go nicely with it, I think, is the challenge there. And not too much hops was kind of the goal of what I was going for. And I wanted to go more like a smoother chocolate feel than like a roasty burnt flavor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it definitely has a bit more of a clean drinking, closer to that maybe 2008 to 2012 bitterness to sweetness ratio, not quite as explosive as we're getting used to now. And one of the things when we talk about like gross Black IPAs, they definitely, or at least on the East Coast in about 2012, people seem to be pursuing making a regular IPA but black, like not any sort of like different character to it, like just seeing what they can do with like these tiny amounts of like debittered black malt or black patent malt to like just get different color and not necessarily, a different style.
I think also, like, when this Black IPA, Mike said this to me this morning, that Black IPA was the downfall of IPA, which, yes and no, but it's when IPA became just a style it became a category. Like, there's so many different kinds of IPAs. And so I think when Black IPA came out, it was like, brew an IPA, but make it black. And now IPA is a style of beer. Like, there's IPA and everything else. And every IPA is not brewed the same. You have to approach them differently. So I think since IPA has come so far, it is maybe a little easier to, like, if Black IPA came back around, I think people could maybe do it better because they have more experience of brewing different styles of IPAs.
Right. I mean, what IPA could mean today is so much broader than what it did at the moment that the style landed. You were touching on something, but you didn't go all the way there. I remember the dark days of Cinnamar. So, right? Like, it was literally your IPA recipe with essentially some food coloring.
Yeah.
You know, it was not too far from what folks are about to do tomorrow on St. Patrick's Day to turn an IPA red, brown, or even darker. And then the flavor contribution is extremely minimal, and it's basically a sight gag.
And even that Cinnamar does have some character to it, which, you know, you can get the color, but there is a definitive threshold where a little goes a long way, and once you've gone past that, you've already gone a long way.
Right. And I believe we should say, thank God, most people don't know what have to know what Cinnamar is today, but it's a malt-based food coloring, as I understand it, right?
Yeah.
And I did buy some just in case, because we are not great about hitting colors.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy I didn't have to use it.
So talk about the malts we did use in this. We're talking a lot about what we didn't want. We ended up employing a variety of things to make this beer dark. So the Carafa, the Midnight Wheat, and then I see Simpson's DRC. What are we doing with our character malts here?
The debittered Carafa 3 is kind of starting with, we made a black lager and then black saison, and now this. That's kind of what I've discovered, or what we've discovered, is the best black malt that doesn't impart any astringencies. It's dehusked. So that's kind of the go-to now for adding black color and not intense astringent roast character.
So when you say dehusked, like if people are picturing a barley kernel, the kind of papery outsides burn as opposed to sort of caramelize, right?
Yes.
And contribute the flavor of burning.
So the dehusk stuff's a lot smoother and it's not as harsh. So that's kind of like the black aspect of it, along with Midnight Wheat, which is wheat also doesn't have a husk, so it's kind of the same thing. So those two are a good way to add the black coloring without gnarly roastiness. And then Simpson's DRC is double roasted caramel malt. So it's really dark caramel malt. So that adds some nice caramel flavor. And it's dark enough to where you're not going to end up with a brown IPA.
Word. Cool. And then another thing that you did, the choices you made on the hops, particularly West Coast, particularly earthy in their character. I know there's some mosaic in the kettle, but I was saying to Zach earlier, one thing that I remember a lot of black IPAs that missed the mark for me personally was tropical hop varietals on top of these kind of like earthy, dirty, dark flavors didn't really jive for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of where people go wrong with a lot of these IPA styles that aren't hazy IPA or even West Coast IPA. Like, you got to come back to those older hops that aren't just citrus bombs. At first, I just want to go straight C hops, but then I want to change it up a little bit because that's almost too easy. Like, everyone does that. So a tandem's one of my favorite non-citrusy tropical punch hop. It's more of like a gingerbread flavor, which I thought would play nicely into here. And then there is some Cascade, obviously, and Simcoe.
Right. For me, I think the gold standard for these beers is there's a drink called Espresso Romano, which is literally just espresso with lemon. That's like very common and that I think is delicious, objectively delicious, and also really nice aroma that you can get here. And if you can hit that along with like the marijuana of my college years, you know, much like hops, marijuana has tended more towards candy and fruity and bubblegummy flavors over the past 2 decades. But this is like Santa Cruz dorm room marijuana nose for me. And I was like, damn, this really did, like, you know, espresso Romano, lamb's bread right next to each other. And I was really pleased with it. Anything else from a technical standpoint? What about the fermentation character that you're after on a black IPA?
It's a pretty standard Chico yeast fermentation character. You don't want really any yeast character coming through. It's really all about that black malt in those hops.
Yeah, centrifuge down, nice and clear. When you get to the end, you got this kind of nice, like, ruby amber.
Yeah, it does. Like, if you shine a light through it, it almost looks like Coca-Cola. Like, it has that red tint to it, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, and you can taste a little bit of that Mexican Coke kind of on the back end there, too.
Absolutely. What do you attribute that to? The Autonum and that kind of like warming spice?
Yeah, that maybe just a tiny bit of that CTZ, you know, in the very beginning of the boil, like a little bit of a, you know, East Coast New York diesel aroma / flavor to it, you know?
Nice. Well, cool. Any other things we definitely want people to know about this black IPA, or if somebody was attempting to homebrew their own black IPA, any other must-dos or things to avoid?
I think it's just if you're brewing an old school style, you can't get caught up in new school techniques. Like, those new fun hops are not going to work here. Like, that's how you end up with bad black IPAs.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Cool.
It's a fine line between getting something that's, you know, dank and getting a black IPA that kind of tastes like a cigarette.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Spliff, okay. Cigarette bad.
Yeah. Yes, definitively.
Awesome.
HenHouse Unruffled was created by Anna Scott. We record at HenHouse Brewing Company's Palace of Barrels in Petaluma, California. Our producer is Brian Henderson, and our associate producers are Josh Staples and Fridge. The music you've been listening to was written and performed by our San Francisco account rep McLean from his album Speechless and Speechless 2, which you can find on Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal, and anywhere one finds dope music. If you have a question or comment about this or any episode of HenHouse Unruffled, please let us know by calling 707-347-9425 to leave a message. You can also send an email to podcast@henhousebrewing.com. For more information, visit www.henhousebrewing.com or stop by one of our Bay Area tasting rooms. The voice you've been listening to is Imani Russell Black. Please listen and drink responsibly.